In this clip, I'll demonstrate how you can rip swings from external MIDI sequences and use them in your Ensoniq ASR, EPS, or perhaps some other Ensoniq sequencer that has a similar operating system. For best viewing, I recommend watching the clip on a larger display, such as a laptop, desktop, TV, etc. Put the clip in full screen mode and set the resolution to 1080p via the settings widget down on the bottom right. If you enjoy the clip, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, feel free to share, and for those of you after sample packs, such as the 909 kit I'm using in this clip, visit store.tonelab.au, where you'll find kits ready to play in your sampler's native format. Last of all, if you need one-on-one drum machine lessons or help with studio configuration, remote sessions are available. Check the description below for details, plus links to other tutorials for the ASR. Now with that out of the way, many of us have struggled for years getting certain things to perform certain swings. Case in point, the Ensoniq ASR 10, which doesn't have a swing percentage feature built in to its operating system. For that reason, we've had to resort to tricks like doubling the sequencer tempo or use the 16 triplet Quantize setting to get a feel similar to what you could easily pull from something like an MPC, which has a very appealing and comprehensive set of swing features. So I'll show you a trick where you can literally rip those percentage swings from an external sequencer, which then gives us the ability to use different feels that the ASR's operating system doesn't offer on its own. For this demonstration, I'll be ripping swings from my trusty MPC 3000 here, which I find has great swings. But if you don't have an MPC, there's really no reason why you couldn't rip swings from any other type of sequencer or DAW using the same principle. Further to that, for those of you with an SB1200, there's another clip where I demonstrate the same thing, but for the SB1200. Link in the description below. Anyway, let's dive in. On the MPC, I've tapped in a fairly straightforward house beat that triggers the ASR, but more accurately, the ToneLab 909 instrument available from the ToneLab store. But the problem with the ASR is, if I need to apply Quantize to a beat like this, then I literally have two options: 16th note Quantize or 16th triplet Quantize. These are the equivalent to 50% swing and 75% swing, that is, if they were represented by values from the common range of percentage swings found on the MPC. And that's a shame because there's literally 23 other degrees of swing that an MPC has to offer. But due to the magic of MIDI, the ASR can quite easily capture these varying degrees of swinging notes, despite not being able to swing them itself. Or in simpler terms, it's like the ASR understands French, but can't speak it fluently. The way you do this is by syncing the ASR sequencer to the MPC, or some other type of external sequencer. Then, while the MPC triggers an ASR instrument, the MPC also provides a detailed map of where to place those notes in your ASR sequence simultaneously. The good thing about the ASR sequencer is that it has a note resolution of 96 ticks per quarter note, which just happens to be the same as the MPC here, provided you're using Roger Lin's original recipe operating system. However, if you're using the Velixi OS, then Velixi operates on a resolution of 192 ticks per quarter note, twice that of Roger's OS. Regardless of that, the ASR will still catch the notes and nudge them to the nearest tick position. And for better or worse, those tiny nuances can sound like the ASR's soul peeping through. So depending on what you throw at it, you might get a little extra on the feel. As mentioned earlier, if you don't have an MPC, then that's fine. Feel free to try any other type of sequencer that features a swing you find appealing. Regardless of whether that's a hardware or software sequencer, the same concept here should work just the same. Whichever you decide to use, connect a MIDI cable from your sequencer's MIDI out port, in my case, MIDI out port A via the rear of the MPC 3000. I tend to avoid longer cables, call me superstitious, but an excessive cable length can add a tiny lag, which is counterproductive in this particular situation. So take the other end of that cable and connect it to the MIDI in port on the rear of the ASR. Now we'll configure the ASR to slave to an external MIDI clock, as well as receive MIDI event information across different instrument tracks. First hit Edit Mode, System MIDI category, and make sure MIDI in mode is set to multi. Then hit Edit Mode, Track category, and check the multi-in MIDI channels for each loaded instrument, and set them accordingly to match up with whichever MIDI channels that the tracks in your external sequencer are transmitting on. In my case, I'm using a few different MPC tracks to trigger various wave samples in a single ASR instrument. But each of those tracks, as you might be able to see, are configured to output MIDI over channel 7 via MIDI port A. So make sure you select the corresponding instrument track on your ASR to record into. In my case, instrument 7, which has the ToneLab 909 kit loaded into it. You could use any other instrument track, just make sure its MIDI channel is the same MIDI channel on your external sequencer. Last but not least, we need to configure the ASR sequencer to use an external MIDI clock. To do that, visit Edit Mode, Sequencer Song category, and cursor across to Clock Source, and cursor up for the MIDI option. Then over on the MPC, aka External Sequencer, we'll visit the sync page and make sure our MIDI clock is being sent out over the appropriate MIDI port, in my case, port A. As a tip, it's wise to disable or mute any other MIDI traffic going out over the same MIDI port. So things like MIDI timecode and or any other MIDI activity occurring on adjacent channels should be temporarily muted during this time. That way, you have the bare minimum of MIDI activity occurring during the recording process. Once you've done that, you should then be able to trigger sounds inside the ASR by tapping the pads on your MPC, like so. If you can't hear anything, make sure your track type is set to drum. At this point, I can dial in and apply, if necessary, any amount of swing and get my hi-hats really swinging. Then, once satisfied with the feel, record them directly into the ASR. What's great about the MPC swing is that you can actually configure different swing amounts, otherwise referred to as percentage values, independently for each sound, which allows you to delicately sculpt a very unique and individual feel. So let's give it a shot. Before I record into the ASR, I'll slow the tempo down on the MPC sequencer, so it's like the MPC is talking slowly to the ASR. Then on the MPC, I recommend you turn loop off so that the MPC stops itself automatically when it reaches the end of the sequence. Another thing I should mention is that while I'm using a 2-bar loop, you can use longer bar counts like 4, 8, 16, etc. at your own discretion. But as a tip, if you've already got an ASR sequence pre-recorded, spare a thought for the bar count. It's generally wise to have the same number of bars in your MPC sequence. That way, they both arrive at the finish line at the same time. Okay, so now that the ASR is prepped and ready for action, I'll do a final cabin check on the MPC. This particular sequence is 2 bars long. I'll apply 68% swing across all tracks. Tempo is down at 30 BPM. Loop is off. I'll press record and play on the ASR and be sure to hit play start on the MPC. Okay, great. I've now captured 2 bars of MIDI triggers out of the MPC into the ASR, which has Roger Lynn's recipe for 68% swing. From here, we can audition that by hitting play on the ASR, but before I do, I'll change the tempo on the MPC back up to 126 BPM. And now hit play on the ASR. Okay, great. I'll hit enter to keep. Then, as a habit, the first thing I do on the ASR is visit Event Edit Track via Command Mode Track Category, cursor left, and set the event type view to all. Then remove the program change and mod wheel controllers that always find themselves on a new sequence at bar 1, beat 1, tick 1. If you're not sure how to do that, there's a quick tip here on the channel explaining how the event editor works. I'll leave the link in the description. Now with the job done, you could pull the MIDI cable out and put the ASR back on its internal clock. Again, to do that, edit mode, sequence a song category, cursor across and cursor down for the internal clock option. Then I've got control again over my sequence tempo from the ASR. Now let's check out how this sounds compared with some other sequences that I recorded earlier, which are processed using the ASR's own Quantize values. This particular sequence here, with the same beat, uses the ASR's own 16th note Quantize. Now we'll listen to the same beat with the ASR 16 triplet Quantize. Now let's try what we just ripped from the MPC using the 68% swing. So what we've just heard is the 68% swing. So theoretically, there's 12 other MPC swing percentages that we could access. I might just mention a couple of tips for troubleshooting. You can use the ASR's Event Edit Track feature to inspect and compare the note to tick placements in your ASR sequence against those in your external sequence's event list. If you find that notes in your ASR sequence are slipping gears, as in arriving later, then try slimming down the load of MIDI traffic by soloing one sound at a time and overdubbing the others, also soloed. I might add, I'm currently using ASR OS version 2. 3.53 is a little more bloated, so the sequencer is known to have a little more lag. The issues I mentioned earlier could be more prone to occur in version 3.53. So try those workarounds if that's all you ever use. Failing that, you could easily use OS version 1.61 or version 2. Then save your sequences, then load them up after rebooting into OS version 3.53. Finally, I prepared a bunch of different swing percentages and saved them. So I'll play us out with the different swing rips, and you might be able to see that the sequences have been labelled to reflect the swing percentage used to record each one. If you enjoyed the clip, hit the thumbs up, subscribe, and feel free to share with your friends and forums. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.